Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming out. Thank you as well to the team for the invite. It's really an honor to be here. As Isaac mentioned, I am a DS alum, and I graduated a couple years back. Currently, I'm pursuing my bachelor's at Penn through the Vagelos Integrated Program of Energy Research. And as the name suggests, my studies focus on applying my engineering and science degrees towards the energy challenges of the world. Today, I want to show you that energy is about so much more than just climate change. In fact, it's about whether countries can make their own decisions, whether hospitals can keep running during emergencies, and whether the lights come back on when people need them the most. I want to pause here for a moment. I know that things like energy and science can seem a little politically complicated right now, so I want to make something very clear. The energy transition is inevitable. In fact, it's already underway, and I hope this talk gets you excited about the changes to come. The title of my talk is Energy Resilience. Energy resilience means having an energy system that can recover quickly from shocks such as a storm, an attack, or a sudden blackout. In 2022, much of Europe had to learn a very hard lesson. When a country relies too heavily on one energy supplier, energy can be used as a weapon. As Russia's war on Ukraine escalated, Russia began to forcefully reduce natural gas supplies to Europe in order to pressure countries to withdraw support. With winter approaching, Europe had to rapidly scramble to diversify its energy resources in order to survive. At that moment, it became very clear that energy was a national security issue. Since then, Europe has invested heavily in becoming more self-reliant through programs like REPowerEU, which focuses on cutting dependence on Russian fossil fuels and instead accelerating the build-out of renewables. So, while Western Europe is looking to become more energy independent, let's look a bit to the future. About a decade ago, Uruguay transformed its energy system, and today it gets 97% of its electricity from renewable sources. Before this transition, Uruguay had no domestic coal, oil, or natural gas, so it had to rely heavily on imported fuels and was vulnerable to global price shocks. In 2008, they appointed Ramon Mendez Galain, a particle physicist and university professor, to serve as its director of energy and lead them to energy independence. Instead of producing all the technology in-house, Uruguay employed a public-private partnership model. Private companies invested in and built the renewable technologies, while the electricity flowed into the grid under long-term contracts to the government. This transition brought in $6 billion in investment, reduced generation costs by 40%, and created 50,000 jobs. By the end of Mendez Galain's term in 2015, Uruguay's grid had gone almost completely renewable in just 7 years. It's truly inspiring coming from a country as large and as wealthy as the United States. A lot of people say that Uruguay could only achieve this because it's so small. But as Mendez Galain puts it, nothing could be further from the truth. Larger countries have more people and money, more capacity to attract investment, and more local manufacturing. In his words, it's much more simple to do this in a large economy than it is in a small one. So there you have it. Not only is the energy transition a large political and economic interest, but it has also been done successfully before. Now, I also want to talk about energy resilience on a smaller scale. Blackouts. About a year ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with NREL's Black Start Group, a group focused on researching the first stage of power restoration after a blackout. Being from the Boston suburbs, I'm sure you and I have experienced plenty of blackouts just from storms or tree fall over the years. And growing up, blackouts were just no big deal. I would go grab my flashlight while my parents grabbed some blankets, and then we'd play card games like BS or Uno until magically, a few hours later, the lights would turn back on. Of course, my story is far from the only truth. In reality, blackouts can be devastating. Take, for example, in 2021, when Winter Storm Uri brought record low temperatures to Texas. As natural gas systems froze over, the electrical grid became unstable, and the power grid operator had no choice but to shut down 40% of generation. Blackouts rolled out for weeks to follow. And in the end, roughly 250 people lost their lives due to not having access to power. It makes you realize just how much of our lives rely on having electricity. Hospitals, communication, water systems, and food storage are just a few of the things that need power in order to help us survive. So blackouts really are disasters, and they affect our lives on a major scale. And with energy demand on the rise, due to new technologies such as AI and electric vehicles, blackouts are forecasted to happen more and more. So, why is it so difficult to just turn the lights back on? Why can't we just reboot the power grid whenever we start having an issue? Well, for starters, power generators themselves need power to operate and to turn on. Kind of a paradox now, isn't it? The first stage of restoring power is called black start, and it involves getting an outside source to turn on those generators, sometimes even a manual crank. After that, it gets even more complicated. You see, you can think of the electrical grid like a highway system. The cars are electricity, the on-ramps are generators, and the off-ramps are demands. There also exists a set of constraints, or speed limits, that govern how power can flow. The first possible issue is a mismatch in power. Even 1% too much generation can cause an overflow in the grid. And just like a major car crash, the resulting explosions or fires can both damage the grid and hurt any people around. The next possible issue is a signal mismatch. The voltage in the grid oscillates in a sinusoidal manner. That means that all the sources have to have the same frequency and phase, which can be difficult to achieve if that information is inaccessible in a blackout. The next issue is time. You see, blackouts get exponentially worse the longer they last, making time one of the most critical issues of all. One thing to consider is how geography plays a role in the time it takes for important infrastructure to regain power. Let's look at an example. Say we have a source of hydropower, such as a dam, about 500 miles away from a hospital. In a blackout, the dam would have to restore power to the entire transmission system between it and the hospital before it could restore the hospital's power. That means that the hospital, despite being the most vulnerable in the blackout, would have to wait longer for everything else to be restored first before it could regain its power. That just doesn't make sense. Enter distributed energy resources, also known as DERs. DERs are small-scale generators or storage units that are generally located closer to the point of use. They're also an essential step towards meeting the nation's energy goals. So, let's reimagine the scenario. Now, instead of relying on the faraway dam, the hospital can pull from nearby resources and regain power much faster than it would otherwise. But of course, there's a catch. The more resources introduced into the grid, the harder it becomes to manage power flow. So while DERs have the potential to resolve blackouts much faster, there is still a lot of research to be done. That's where groups like mine come in. Engineers around the world are designing devices, algorithms, and simulations to ensure that one day blackouts will be no big deal. So as we're coming to a close, let's retrace the facts that fuel our work. Blackouts are devastating, and they need to be resolved as quickly as possible. The forecasted number of blackouts is on the rise due to new energy demand. And while DERs may complicate power flow, they will provide a faster solution in the end. Furthermore, DERs and a diversified energy portfolio can give countries the political foundation they need to make their own decisions without having to worry about losing their resources. So, while there's a lot of negative conversation today around the energy transition, rest assured that today's engineers, policymakers, and business people are working hard to create the things that we need to have a safer and more resilient energy future. On a final note, if any part of this talk sounded interesting to you, I really push you to keep pursuing energy. It's a wonderful field that intersects policy, business, science, and just everyday life. And of course, there's so many different ways to get involved. That is all I have for you today. Thank you.